There's something you've been meaning to start. You know what it is, but somewhere along the way, watching someone else do it really well became the reason you haven't started. Welcome to the Steady Becoming podcast. We already know most of what we need to grow. We know that focus matters, consistency compounds, done beats perfect. We know it. We just forget it when it counts. This show is the reminder that what works is often simple and often steady, because it's easy to forget. I'm your host, Miriam, and this is episode 1. In this episode, I'll start with a story, and then we'll talk about it. But first, since this is episode 1, quick intro. Hi, I'm Miriam. I live in the Philly suburbs, and my weekdays start at 6:20 a.m. I get my 2 boys up for school, feed our 2 pet bunnies, yes, we have 2 cute little bunnies, and head into my home office. My husband and I are both home during the day, which honestly still feels kind of surreal. I've been working for myself for about 10 years. For most of that time, I was building a wedding stationery design business on Zazzle. And I was not a designer when I started. I taught myself, and the first designs I posted were so embarrassing. I'm not a psychologist or a coach or anything like that. I'm just someone who thinks a lot about growth and why we get in our own way, and who struggles with it too. So yeah, that's me. Okay, let's get into it. There was a woman who lived on a lane of well-tended gardens. Her neighbor's garden had a rose hedge along the shared fence, trained over years into something deliberate. There were perennials that returned without being asked. A small kitchen garden with hand-marked rows. A fig tree that had taken the better part of a decade to fruit. In other ways, the neighbor was not remarkable. She wore plain clothes. She moved through her garden without hurry, as though the hard part was behind her. The woman at the window had no garden to speak of. On her small windowsill, she kept a pot of herbs that kept dying, and a packet of seeds still in its paper sleeve. The printing faded from being moved and set aside so many times. She had work that needed her, a house that needed her, a family that needed her. She told herself this was realistic. She told herself it was too late for the kind of depth her neighbor had. She told herself you could not manufacture years of tending. You could not rush a fig tree. She had thought this once while hanging laundry. She had thought it again while washing dishes. By the 3rd time, she had stopped calling it a thought. It had become, in time, a fact. Once, on a warm evening, she had stood at the fence, close enough to smell the roses, just to be near them for a moment. She stayed until the light changed. The gap between her yard and her neighbor's garden felt like a verdict. She gave it a reasonable explanation, went inside, and closed the door. One morning, in the cooler season, she was sitting at her window and noticed her neighbor doing something strange. She was crouched at the base of the rose hedge with a small trowel and handwritten notes. She dug a small hole, reconsidered, filled it back in. She sat back on her heels, looked at the plant, and tried again. A third time she dug, and a third time she sat back, looking at it the way a person looks at a situation they don't quite know how to read. The woman at the window had always imagined her neighbor in a state of quiet mastery, but she was not completed. She was mid-sentence. She was, in plain clothes, on an ordinary morning, still learning what she was doing. The woman at the window held very still. She forgot to breathe. Then her eyes went to the herbs on the windowsill. Overwatered, probably. Not enough light. She moved the pot to the east-facing sill, the one that caught the morning sun. She found the packet of seeds and opened it. Okay, so let's talk about this. When you look at someone who's farther along than you on something you really want, the neighbor with her trained rose hedge and her fig tree and her perennials that just come back every year, you're not seeing the full picture. You're seeing the results of years. You're not seeing the failures, the restarts, the ordinary days where nothing worked and she kept going. But your brain doesn't register it that way. It registers, that's what this is supposed to look like. And then quietly, without drama, I don't look like that. So you don't start. And I think comparison is sneaky that way. I think it's most dangerous when it makes you feel logical about giving up. When being realistic is just the story you tell yourself after you've already decided the gap is too big, because it doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like good judgment. Okay, say you want to start painting and you finally buy the supplies. Canvas, brushes, a starter set of acrylics. You're excited. And then you open Instagram to look for inspiration. And you spend the next 40 minutes scrolling painters who've been doing this for 15 years. Loose, confident brushstrokes. Color that looks effortless. You close the app, look at your blank canvas. You put the lid back on the paint. And the supplies end up on the shelf. Or maybe it's Substack. Maybe you've been sitting on the idea for a year. You know what you want to write about, but every time you draft a first post, you end up reading someone else's newsletter instead. The one with 40,000 subscribers and a writing voice that feels fully formed and certain. You close the tab feeling kind of embarrassed by your first draft. You think, mine sounds like I'm still figuring it out. So you don't publish. And you can't know this because you weren't there, but that's probably exactly what her writing sounded like in year one. The neighbor's garden didn't arrive fully formed. It was built in ordinary moments, across ordinary seasons, by someone who was still, on a random morning, crouching in the dirt with a trowel and handwritten notes, trying to figure out where to dig. We just didn't see that part. So, what if you think about it like this? The person you keep watching isn't proof that it's too late. They're actually the best evidence you have that the thing you want is real and reachable and worth the time. They built it, which means it can be built. I know that's not like a guarantee, but it's evidence. And you've just been using it as evidence against yourself instead. And you probably didn't realize you were doing that. So you might be thinking something like, okay, but in the story, the neighbor's garden still took years, and I don't have years. And I get that. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying the constraints aren't real. the full life, the competing demands, that's real. But I think that thought also assumes that the only version worth having is the fully mature one, the 10-year fig tree, the trained rose hedge. And if you can't have that, why start? But I don't think that's actually the choice in front of you. I think the choice is between starting now and having something real, or not starting and having nothing. You don't need a decade. The season you spend deciding whether to start is a season that could have been your year one. So, question for you. Who have you been watching and quietly using as evidence that you're behind? And what do you actually know about their year one? Sit with that. And then, when you're ready, open that seed packet. If this episode resonated, go ahead and like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, send it to them. Honestly, that's how shows like this get found by the right people. This is The Steady Becoming. Around here, we don't burn it down. We adjust and we keep going. And when you do, there's no telling the ripple effect on you and quietly on everyone around you. You got this.